With a few episodes out and one competitor that was initially extremely promising but then spiraled into tarnation faster than you could say, I am now convinced that Dandadan will be the best anime of this season. So let's take a look at what makes it so great and the story of how a nerd with a notebook full of scenes from his favorite movies got to direct his first anime series and knocked it out of the park. Based on the extremely popular manga that coincidentally has the same title, Dandadan, what are the chances? 100%? Oh. By former Chainsaw Man assistant Yukinobu Tatsu, Dandadan is a balls-to-the-wall, pun intended, screwball, pun intended, action horror romantic comedy that will sweep you off your feet with its goofy, silly high school rom-com elements before plunging you into an eclectic but somehow cohesive mashup of masterfully crafted cinematic horror set pieces that will make you say things like, man, I wish I had seen more old Japanese movies so I could understand all these references, and man, I wish they hadn't drawn that teenage girl like that, at least it gets better after the first couple episodes, and where'd Obama go? Wasn't Obama supposed to be here? And wait, where'd this kid's balls go? Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm an awkward guy after all. After getting flavor blasted by this unbelievably kick-ass opening sequence rife with references to the likes of Ultraman and some of Science Saru's previous work, which was animated by Abel Gongora, the director of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, and which I plan to do a full animation breakdown of, make sure to subscribe for that by the way, we're introduced to Momo Ayase, popular, bored high school girl, S-tier mopey walker, and worshipper of Japan's Clint Eastwood, Ken Takakura, to the point that her one criteria for a boyfriend is that he looks like the late actor, doesn't believe in aliens, but does believe in yokai, though she's never seen one. On the other hand, Okarun, to use his nickname for reasons that will become clear in about 1 minute and 50 seconds from now, awkward guy, haver of huge glasses that are extremely useful as a visual metaphor for his desire of connection, and UAP conspiracy theory connoisseur. Seriously, where the hell is Obama? I really don't understand why they took out Obama. I can't even tell if this is supposed to be Trump or just generic Jawn W. Whiteman, the W stands for white guy, believes in aliens despite having never seen one, but doesn't believe in yokai. I hope I didn't lose you in those nested parentheticals. Sometimes I really can't help myself. I'm an awkward guy. So when confronted, each attempts to prove that their thing exists by challenging the other to venture into a supposed hotspot for alien and supernatural activity, respectively. And, well, surprise, they're both real. And both very vulgar, apparently. It's a dick and balls comedy, if you will. The lecherous yokai Turbo Granny,
I let you suckle my teats, boy,
who just wanted to gobble Okarun's
dong.
And the deeply confused aliens from the planet Serpo who just wanted to extract Momo's womb and so-called
banana organs
end up inadvertently clashing in a fast-paced burst of incredibly creative action animation and economical storytelling in which every single choice of framing, line quality, or color serves a direct purpose to the story being told. Each of the unlikely pair realizes that the other person's thing actually is real, and they're launched together into a series of reluctant battles with their newfound magic powers to retrieve Okarun's stolen reproductive organs. And remember, if you don't smash that like button right now, I will steal your... I probably shouldn't say that, huh? I'm an But they might not be such an unlikely pair after all, as Momo is shocked to discover not only does Okarun keep accidentally quoting Ken Takakura's famous line from a 1984 life insurance commercial, his actual name is Ken Takakura. Everything about this show oozes pure, unrestrained style, from the wacky, energetic animation to the otherworldly score by composer Kensuke Ushio to the bold use of color. But underneath all that extravagance, like a little boy crammed into the inner workings of a shiny steam engine before we had child labor laws, using his little hands to make sure that all them shiny gears keep on spinning away so the fat cats in their top hats can have their precious... steam? There's a crucial logic holding it all together. Every choice serves the narrative or the feeling of two opposite worlds being smashed together and relies on established film techniques and references to do so. Nothing is there just to be cool. Like this scene, our first introduction to the Serpoians feels cold, stable, and sterile. Most shots are completely static and imitate a telephoto lens that compresses the space. When the camera does move, it's always a simple, controlled pan or tilt, like this one that hilariously reveals what these creeps think is handling something with care. Their psychokinesis is portrayed through an emulated version of analog kaleidoscope lens effects used in the original 60s Ultraman TV series, and when they reveal their true forms, which are also an amalgamation of alien designs from that same show and others like it, they, like all the other aliens in the series, are animated in 3D, giving them this strange feeling like they're out of place. Particularly in contrast with Turbo Granny / Okarun, who, representing the yokai side of the equation, intrudes lives on this sterile world with her/his crazy unpredictable movements, which are followed closely by an unrestrained simulated camera, almost always in wide angle. When her spirit is in its purest form, being wrenched from Okarun's body, in this cut from an animator for whom this seems to be their first key animation credit, Kenta Ishimori, all the clean line work even gives way to these texture-filled frames that look like they've been scribbled haphazardly with thick charcoal. It's a crime that impact frames like this one that may as well be standalone art pieces are only on screen for 1/24th of a second. And of course, that striking color palette is really a strictly regimented color coding system with a theme color for each of these opposing forces of nature. Deep blue for the aliens, deep red for the yokai, and this divine turquoise for Momo's psychic power that triumphantly emerges towards the end of the first episode. All these themes converge in outstanding shots like this one that marks the pinnacle of Okarun's emotional arc for the episode. After getting absolutely bodied by this Serpoian's Ultraman beam, Okarun/Turbo Granny is on the verge of succumbing to the stylistic influence of the spaceship. The shot is flat and telephoto. The deep red has faded into a pale purple hue that almost becomes part of the surrounding blue color palette. But as he screams, "I'd turn into a monster for her," and the mask physically reforms and changes shape, the deep red returns and the simulated camera zooms out back to the wide fisheye focal length that stretches the space out and makes it look like this thing is protruding out of your screen at you. Just like the literal color palette itself, when the opposing energies come together, they only make each other pop more in contrast. To understand where this guiding logic all comes from, we need a little bit of background. But before we get to that, I'll make this quick, but this video is sponsored by my Patreon page. I just posted a little behind the scenes clip about how I made the animation at the start of this video, as well as a little outtake, which I liked but had to cut for time. So if you want to get a little peek behind the curtain like the voyeur you are, or just want to support the channel, feel free to check it out. The link is in the description. Back to you, John. Thanks, John. If you're a pretentious little freak like me, you might be sold simply by the fact that this show comes from Science Saru, the enigmatic, unpredictable studio known for masterpieces like Devilman Crybaby, Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, and my personal favorite anime of all time, Ping Pong the Animation. The studio was founded by animation god and my actual father, don't look that up, Masaaki Yuasa. Yuasa's bold, surreal, energetic, and free-flowing style has been deeply entwined into the studio's DNA since its inception, and has persisted even since he retired as CEO in 2020 to go spam these wacky little blue and yellow animation snippets on Twitter. But since then, while his influence is still clearly visible through the brigade of talented artists that he and co-founder and longtime collaborator Eun-young Choi have assembled, more recently the studio has been quickly putting forward its younger members and allowing them to express their own creative visions in more prominent roles to fill the vacuum. A straight adaptation of a popular action comedy shonen manga isn't exactly the type of project the studio is known for, but with Yuasa's former assistant and certified film buff, Fuuga Yamashiro at the helm, that's exactly what makes it so great. Yamashiro joined Science Saru in 2017 as an assistant production manager during the production of Night is Short, Walk On Girl. He was essentially Yuasa's secretary, but he worked his way up to assistant director on projects like Eizouken. I've given plenty of praise on this channel to Dungeon Meshi, another manga adaptation from a unique studio with a well-defined style and its relatively inexperienced director, Yoshihiro Miyajima, who comes from a production background rather than an animation one, and whose deep appreciation for the source material and smart management choices made the best use of a wealth of creative talent for a project that was a little different than the type Studio Trigger tends to regularly take on. And in many ways, Yamashiro is similar to Miyajima. After reading a few interviews, I find this guy really interesting. Having worked so closely with one of the greatest living auteur directors, you might think he would share that same overpowering individual creative influence. But as he's pointed out in interviews himself, it's much the opposite. Possibly acting as a balancing force to Yuasa, Yamashiro actually considers himself to be the anti-auteur. Like Miyajima, he's not originally an animator, and like I mentioned, there's clearly still a strong influence from Yuasa's creative vision in elements like these goofy but expressive walking animations, these absurd stretchy poses where the stylized flow of energy feels more important than the consistency of the characters' bodies, and the character designs that Yamashiro specifically asked character designer Naoyuki Onda to simplify from their manga counterparts to allow them to move more easily and organically. By the way, for those of you who can read, I'll drop a link in the description to an article from Kevin at Sakuga blog, which was the starting point for much of my research for this video. He goes into even more detail about the production and crew behind the show, but you may be able to tell that the majority of Yamashiro's influence actually comes not from anime or manga, but from live-action film, something that he seems to have studied obsessively, maybe to make up for his perceived lack of innate skill or vision. During one interview, while he was working on Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, he compares himself to the character Mizusaki with her encyclopedic knowledge of production techniques, before pulling out a notebook notebook filled to the brim with scenes from his favorite movies that he had dissected, broken down into storyboards, and used to identify and collect techniques from great storytellers that he could then combine and repurpose as his own. This is why we break stuff down, people. He describes Yuasa's shocked reaction when he showed him the notebook in his job interview, then quickly downplays it as a sign that there aren't many people in the industry and describes it as a secret weapon for people who can't draw. But if you look beyond that humility, you can see someone who's determined to understand what makes stories great and obsessively collects as much information and as many techniques as he possibly can. Even as the anti-auteur, paradoxically, his fingerprint is very visible in the final product. And while, unlike Miyajima, who pushed for Dungemeshi to get made because he personally loved it so much, Yamashiro says that he simply was offered the role and took it, that fingerprint of a pragmatic, obsessive film nerd is perfect for Dandadan, which leans heavily on its own eclectic mix of cinematic inspiration. From Sadako vs. Kayako, the campy crossover of The Ring and The Grudge, to classic Japanese monster movies and TV, and of course, that one life insurance commercial from 1984. Back in that Eizouken interview, Yamashiro gives an example of one tool that he's added to his collection. There's a technique called dolly zoom, which is a technique that changes the perspective of the background while keeping the size of the subject. In Cult of Chucky, which I saw recently, there's a scene in which a long passageway is filmed in telephoto and slowly zooms out while a wheelchair moves forward. The character is getting closer, but the viewer feels farther away. This is the kind of thing I collect. I'd like to combine these things in various ways and do it in animation. And sure enough, that exact technique rears its head in Dandadan as Okarun sprints away from Turbo Granny and the mouth of the tunnel stretches impossibly into the distance. Also, mad respect for using the 7th installment of the Child's Play franchise as your example of a dolly zoom instead of like Vertigo, Jaws, or Goodfellas. Especially when, again, the source material is built on the very foundation of campy horror movies. Or take this scene where Momo brings Okarun back to her grandmother's shrine for the first time. We open on an intimate close-up of Okarun cleaning his glasses rather than a wide establishing shot, a technique Yamashiro might have collected from any number of filmmakers. The quiet, nervous atmosphere is smashed to pieces by a sudden explosion of intensity, with some more of that organic feeling textured animation in the deep red fire, and a handful of crazy camera movements like this chucklesome reaction shot of Momo. But when the flames die down, both figuratively and literally, we restart the scene and return to that exact same close-up shot. In fact, if you overlay these two cuts over each other, you can see that they're quite literally reusing the exact same animation, the only difference being that the boy's shirt is now tattered, as if to say, "Take two!" Now, it's not all perfect. The show's cinematic influences lead it to rely heavily on camera movement, which works great in moments like the ones I mentioned earlier, but in others can feel clumsily implemented when, instead of using either 3D environments or hand-animated backgrounds, they instead take regular painted 2D background elements and try to move and warp them to give the illusion of 3D space. It doesn't always work as well as you'd hope. But while some choices do miss the mark, which is sort of expected for a director who's taking on his first full series, there are just so many examples of choices that hit, like these two matching shots where the background is identical, but Momo's little grumpy walk changes from being led by her shoulders to being led by her ankles to reflect her shift from dejected to angry. Or the carefully choreographed camera work in this scene that restricts your view to a single object at a time, following each one until it's interrupted by something else, just as Okarun spirals into his head thinking he doesn't belong here and physically restricts his own vision. He's routinely confined to a smaller frame within the frame, sequestered off from the rest of the scene. And all this culminates in this shot where he's framed claustrophobically in the doorway in the corner of the screen, his body half obscured by the wall as he retreats back into his comfortable position as an outcast and a loser. But now Momo has ventured into his little bubble to try to coax him out, only for the camera to reframe to the other side of the doorway and open the scene back up into a big silly argument, or even something as simple and understated as this slow pan over the mountains to show the passage of time. Let me know in the comments what stood out to you, because there are so many more examples. Mangaka Yukinobu Tatsu had reportedly almost given up on drawing following a series of failures to get serialized and a period of writer's block until his editor told him to just draw freely without even thinking about story whatsoever. And when reading Dandadan, that origin does shine through. It's clear that this is a series made of pure energy. I haven't caught up on the series yet, so I I can't speak to later arcs, but at least in the first 20 or so chapters, it's almost exclusively driven by capital S situations that our characters just keep getting tossed unceremoniously into, and relies heavily on charming characters, stylish art, and relentless breakneck pacing. Basically, it's totally conceivable that Tatsu is completely making it up as he goes along. Take this sequence for example, where Okarun and Momo talk on the phone as they each tentatively explore their respective spooky spots. It follows a common format for the series. We jump straight from the heated argument in the previous scene into this one before you even know what's happened. Fast-paced, character-driven dialogue allows the two characters a brief moment of emotional connection before it's all interrupted when Tatsu suddenly slaps you in the face with a completely unexpected moment of shock and silence. Turbo Granny appears in a beautiful full-page spread with scratchy detail that stands out against the cartoony image of Okarun that immediately preceded it.
I'll let you suckle my teats, boy.
And virtually the same thing happens a couple pages later when Momo is ambushed by the Serpoian aliens in her counterpart scene. It's a formula that will certainly hold your attention, but in animation it benefits greatly from not only the animators at Science Saru's incredibly organic character acting in moments like this one, but also from the deft hands of a director for whom every single choice is an opportunity to intentionally serve the storytelling structure of the scene. In this case, to acquaint us with the protagonists and gradually build tension towards the action scenes. Subtle directing choices put us in the heads of the characters, like the way the camera follows Momo's motion exactly in this shot, stopping and starting to emphasize her small tentative movements. Or this tracking shot where the smooth motion of the 3D background only underscores the way jittery little Okarun snaps from key pose to key pose with no in-betweens. In the manga, the environments quickly fade into the background behind speech bubbles. In the anime though, Yamashiro, who by the way also directed this episode and did storyboards for it, puts way more emphasis on the locations themselves. Momo feels enveloped by this creepy environment. Sometimes a small part of a large frame filled with debris, sometimes partially obscured by objects in the foreground, one of which even adds some creepy foreshadowing, sometimes even completely absent in a handful of quiet point-of-view shots that show you just enough to wonder if there's something hiding in the darkness over there, and gives the scene just enough breathing room to make you feel a little uneasy. The added flashlight beams make these places feel vast and intimidating, peering into the darkness and revealing only some of it, while also, it must be said, showing off some amazing compositing and effects work with the way the light flares in the lens and bounces off objects in the scenes. This semi-translucent curtain obscures Momo and subtly brings attention to the growing intensity of the blue light from outside the windows, while also cleverly acting as a practical transition into her story about her childhood. To take a very big swing here, maybe Yamashiro collected this technique from The Conversation, a movie that very subtly gives you the sense of being watched by just filling every scene with all kinds of semi-translucent sheets, curtains, raincoats, etc. Momo's story is now made up almost exclusively of close-ups, mostly of her hands, which gives it the intimate, subjective feeling of an old memory. Match cuts from a hand to a hand, a shadow to a shadow, ground the memory in the present moment and begin to establish a striking thematic color palette. The cold blue of what turns out to be the alien spaceship outside the window contrasted with the warm, comforting red of her grandmother's spiritual teachings. Meanwhile, for Okarun, the blue sky in the distance is the literal light at the end of the tunnel, while the overwhelming red of Turbo Granny's spiritual energy threatens to swallow him whole. Each of them is out of their element. And each of these details is a deliberate choice, many probably ripped straight from the pages of this nerd's notebook of tools from his favorite movies. It may seem counterintuitive to ascribe so much importance to the creative vision of one person who specifically talks about his own lack of strong creative vision, and to be clear, he's far from the only person playing a major role. But I think it's precisely that encyclopedic knowledge of film techniques and that pragmatic, meticulous attitude that may have acted as a stabilizing force for Yuasa, and that also provides some needed structure to a ball of pure energy like Dandadan, while still preserving its essence and the eclectic influences that it wears on its sleeve. Speaking of works of art that are deeply rooted in the techniques and language of live-action film, I also made a video about Goodbye Eri, the mind-bending and deeply emotional one-shot manga from Yuki Nobutatsu's own former mentor and Chainsaw Man creator Tatsuki Fujimoto, whose panels are literally formatted like actual frames of video. So you can go ahead and watch that one. It's up in the corner, but it should also pop up on the screen while I'm thanking my amazing supporters over on Patreon, who all have credit scores above 900. Katie L, Siegweasel, Retrohime, Serial, Leia Pico, Nutaf, Patrick Davison, Arborix, Lisette MT, Junjun, Dr. Yellow McSwag, Grav G, Squid Goo, Joe, and Fuggle Nugget, as well as everyone else you're seeing on the screen right now. Thanks for watching.